other people who have to look at that and work on that. I am simply interfering if I try to do that. And again in the spiritual life, the principle applies: mind your own business. People are much too much inclined to start interfering and tinkering with other people instead of looking to themselves. To give another example, I can pray, may God be merciful to me, a sinner. I cannot pray, may God be merciful to you, a sinner. That's not my business to say to other people, you are sinners and may God have mercy on you. I might say, perhaps, yes, think whether you should repent. But once I start saying, may God have mercy on you, a sinner, I am judging you, and that's not my business. So we have to start with ourselves. Sometimes people say to me, why do we say in the prayer before communion, I believe and I confess that thou art of a truth the Christ, the Son of the living God, who came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the first. Once somebody in my congregation said to me, you're perhaps not a very good parish priest, but you don't really think that you're a very great sinner. You actually think you're quite a respectable person. So why do you say in public that you are the first of sinners? Aren't you being insincere when you say that prayer in front of us all? And my answer is this: the sins that matter most of all to me are my own sins, because that is what I can work on with God's help. So for me personally, my sins are the first sins and the most important sins. It's not for us to say who is a greater sinner and who is a lesser sinner in God's eyes. God knows that, and we leave the judgment to him. But for me personally, those sins are the most important, which I have committed, which I need to deal with. So that is why I say I am the first of sinners. So I would apply all along the principle of mind your own business.
I think you gave that article to me, as you are wont to do with many. Avoid it, but then probably file it where I find it.
Only may I just follow up and say, of course, you shouldn't confuse what you've been saying here with the church giving up prayers for the dead. You make list early in the year. I mean, for example, if a person happened to have know for a fact that they know someone who's on that list, certainly lived in turbulent and let's say a great grandfather, whatever, on that list. And this is not the same thing you're talking about. This is the time for the church to be.
Yes, I mean, we do pray, obviously, for God to forgive others, but we don't pray in the spirit of suggesting that I am the one who forgives injuries done to other people. God is the one who deals with that, not me.
Maybe if one more question on the forgiveness, maybe we should move on to something else. If anyone has something. Yes, Elizabeth, you did.
You said earlier that, if we remember what, it's going to be traced with instances where documents to us that are for us. If we remember that, as long as we remember that with love, that's before. Can you explain how you get to that point and an example of that?
I wish I could. If there was an easy answer to your question, the whole matter of forgiveness would not be so difficult. But one thing we can do and should do is to pray for the people against whom we feel a deep resentment. Not perhaps to pray too often, because then it becomes obsessive, but certainly to pray for them and to reflect that if we feel a deep resentment against other people or a deep anger, and therefore that other person is a stumbling block to us, very probably we are also a stumbling block to them. They probably have also feelings of resentment against us. And so if we are unable to forgive them, that is probably going to be an obstacle also for them on their path. So we should pray in that spirit, may I not make the path of that other person harder and more difficult for them.
Okay, a real shift in gears. In our state, we are faced with a secular society, in our country, I think is more accurate, that we are faced with a secular society that accepts homosexuality as acceptable. We are hearing more about normalizing so-called gay marriages. Our children are told in public school alternate lifestyles are okay. How do we deal with this secular moral abnormality at work and in the school, in Christian churches, and even in the World Council of Churches, it says?
With all due respect, I think we should deal with that issue the way we deal with any other issue in relation to our children or in relation to the greater society that involves behaviors or issues or principle that we think are contrary to our beliefs and to what we want our children to learn. Many of us do not want our children to swear, and we know they're going to hear it. And we do what we can to encourage them to understand that while other people believe and other people behave that way, we don't want them to. And although it's possible that the issue of homosexuality may seem to have a greater impact, I urge people to think about it as one among many issues and develop a general style for handling issues in relation to ourselves and our family and our church and our friends, so that we're not singling out one issue as somehow being even greater than many, many of the other issues. We will end up living in a way that's different from the way that other people live. And if we are to have an impact or an effect on people, we need to continue to live that way. If we have a strong enough feeling about gays or pornography or about what goes on in publications or in a variety of other areas, then perhaps it's incumbent upon us to put forth the effort to become whatever, legislators, city council members, senators, congressmen, whatever, to be in a position where we might exercise greater power. But if we're not willing to do that, then we need to work within the framework of our families, our neighborhoods, our churches, to get behind and enforce and encourage what we believe is correct, and call attention to the fact that we don't have to live the way other people live.
We have to accept the fact, whether we live in the United States or in Britain, almost any country in the world today, that there is a difference between what is legal and what we as Christians consider what is moral. There are many things now, here and in Britain, which the state regards as legal, but which we as Christians do not consider acceptable. That's something we've got to live with, and it's not going to change. I don't see any immediate prospect of returning to the situation which perhaps did exist in ideal in the past of a Christian society, where what the state upheld in law was what the church taught as right. That's no longer our situation. So if we are going to be Christians and bring our children up as Christians, that has to depend on personal choice. The priest in our modern secular societies can no longer rely on the schoolmaster and the policeman to do his job for him. He has got to preach the faith, and his people have to accept it freely and willingly. So today, far more perhaps than in the past, what matters is our own personal choice, how we use our freedom. We are not forced by the laws of society to observe Christian moral standards. We have to choose freely to do that. And if people who, without breaking any laws, are doing what we Christians consider deeply immoral, that's a fact of the world we live in. So we have to say to our children, if you want to be a true Christian, you will be like a salmon swimming upstream.
On that, you have, please, Robin.
I just wonder if people are acting from a different point of reference, like they're secular people, and maybe to hold someone accountable is to judge them. So maybe I answer my own question. But if they do not believe, for instance, that marriage is a sacrament, that it's a union of two people becoming one, then are they breaking the law if they do not subscribe to God's law? I mean, are they held accountable for something that is not a law to them?
Trouble with God?
What we've been hearing tonight, that's not my business.
I don't mean to be jocular or impolite, but somebody was baiting me once and said, do you really believe that you have to be a Christian in order to be saved? And I said, I believe that may well be true, but it's none of my business what God does with people who don't believe. I'm in the position where I have been taught and I believe, and it says if you've already learned and you believe, then yes, I'm responsible. But I don't know what happens to the people who've never heard, and I don't know what happens to people who heard and don't believe. I leave that to God, and I don't play God's game.
I think we think many of us kind of getting worked up or having a white hat, black hat mentality or something, you know, for people who consider being immoral, but to them they're not. They have a standard, and they have a kind of morality of their own. So in a way, it's like judging them. But yet we've been, you know, we have the Bible as our guide. So it gives us more mercy for them. Maybe if we don't hold them accountable to the standard that we've been given. Not that we can be. It's not situational ethics, but it may be giving us the freedom to love them in a better way. This is where I want to comment.
People tend to operate out of their perceptions. If they perceive themselves as Christians, then they'll tend to operate as if they are Christians. If they have a model for that in the family or in the parish community, if they perceive themselves as free and free to choose from that smorgasbord of life that has presented us with every option, then it's okay. Then they perceive themselves as doing nothing wrong. So perception has a lot to do with how people behave. And it's important, whether it's in the church school or in the parish or in the home, that we try to raise children with a sense of Christian presence or Christian reality, that they are, in fact, accountable and answerable for their behavior without judging them. But the issue of homosexuality is particularly interesting or complex because it's, in a sense, it's been put on the table of options where it never was before. And a lot of our children are choosing it as an optional style of life without any particular genetic or hormonal predisposition to it. for a variety of reasons. And Dr. Dowd can correct me if I'm wrong. It's not unusual for boys to pass through a phase that resembles something like a homophilic period. And the priest's job is to tell them not to open that door. There's certain doors that they may not open, that they may not experiment with, because it's not unusual to find in high schools homosexual experimentation. And so often just that, it's homosexual experimentation. And at the seminary, when we do ethics, I urge my students to confess teenagers, quite differently than they confess adults, because of that hormonal engine that tends to drive them, as opposed to adults. But there are certain doors they may not open. I think we have to warn our children not to even knock on those doors.
I think there's a related issue. That is, many subjects and many topics and many items of behaviors are now considered to be someone's right. So that we, as Orthodox Christians, are in a position where we are really at odds, or maybe even at war, with what's going on in the greater society. As our Metropolitan Philip once said in a sermon at one of the archdiocese conventions, he says, we are not a politically correct church. It may be the right of people to be gay, but we still consider it wrong. And it may be the right of people to get a divorce if they choose, but we do not consider that the preferred mode. So that we are stuck with living within a situation in which the direction that our society seems to be going seems to me to be a self-destructive one. Because I'm not trying to be facetious, but I'm waiting for a murderers' right group to begin, that murderers have certain rights. And to me, it's only a few inches away before we get to something like that, where people feel they have the right to do things. And where it's going to end, I don't know, but to the extent that we can have influence over anyone or anything, I think it's important for us to continue to operate and exert that influence if we can. This is not the first time in history that Christians were in opposition or at odds, so to speak. And as I think I might have mentioned, and if I didn't, I should have, we're not subject to fighting lions and tigers in the arena anymore, but these are the lions and tigers that we have to struggle with and deal with at this point. Shall I talk some more while you're looking that up, Your Grace? I'd like to share something with you. I just kind of remembered it. A gentleman named the Right Reverend John Namey happens to be the gentleman who was the first director of the Antiochian Village Camp. Prior to that time, he was the pastor of our parish, Antiochian Parish, St. George in Houston, Texas. And one evening during prime time, and this goes back quite a while because television is even worse now than it was in 1978. And this happened before 1978. He reported to us that he had seen something on television one evening that he felt was absolutely offensive and inappropriate. So he called the station and told whoever it was that he wanted the station to be aware and to do something about it. And he in turn received a letter inviting him to bring whatever clergyman he wanted to a discussion at the station. And he was in touch with, I guess, one or two of the local Catholic priests. He was in touch with one or two of the Protestant pastors, and I think he knew one or two rabbis. And he went down there, he and 7 other clergymen. And he was ushered into a room that had 30 or 32 other people there. And each one of them was identified as a pastor or religious of some sort. And these other 32, and during the discussion, said there was absolutely nothing wrong with the program. They thought it was perfectly appropriate. And the station manager said, it's 32 against 8. What do you want me to do? And that's the way the station handled it. They were able to find people who professed to be connected with a church of some sort, and they tried to make a vote out of it. It's really not a vote. But that's what we have to deal with. And we need to do the best we can until things change or until we can make things change. Did you find it yet?
In regard to your question, in what way should people who do not accept Christianity be judged, and are they answerable to God when they do things that are contrary to the Christian teaching? I would suggest a careful study of the first 2 chapters of St. Paul's epistle to the Romans. And the argument there is extremely complex, but he is wrestling with exactly that question. I'm not sure how clear his answer is, but this is something you might study together and discuss in your community. He says that as many as have sinned in the law, and that means the Jewish law, will be judged by the law. So he's quite clear that if you are a Jew and under the Jewish law, it is by that law that you will be judged in God's sight. Then he goes on to the Gentiles, those who do not accept the Jewish law. And he puts it positively rather than negatively, but you can turn it round. When the Gentiles who do not have the law, by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness. And then he goes on to speak of God's judgment. So there he implies that all humans do have a conscience. That's, of course, a difficult thing, because actually, if you have never been taught moral rules, if you have lived with people who lead deeply immoral lives, do you then have an informed conscience? How far can we talk about a natural law written in all persons' hearts? That's a very difficult question. The Roman Catholic Church, I think, has a fairly clear teaching about a natural law, and therefore, in the Roman Catholic view, people who sin against the natural law, which would be what their conscience tells them, even though they're not Christians, are answerable before God. And exactly the normal Christian teaching would be that homosexuality is against nature. It's not politically correct to say this, but we do, in fact, regard homosexuality as unnatural. That was the way, in past ages, Christians did speak of that. You're not very popular if you talk in this way today. But I think we've got the question. You have the Christian law and the Jewish law revealed in the Bible. But what about people who don't read the Bible and don't accept it? Are they simply without any kind of inner standards at all? I think St. Paul is saying that people do have a conscience, and there are many things which people who know nothing of the Jewish or the Christian law yet recognize to be wrong. Rape, and particularly pedophilia, the corruption and molesting of children, that is regarded in almost every society today as unacceptable. people's conscience, whether they are Christians or not, tells them it is wrong to defile and molest children. I wonder, in our very amoral society today, there are still two things which are seen universally as wrong, and they are incest and the corruption of children, the sexual corruption of children. And surely we as Christians will say people who do those things, even if they don't accept Christianity at all, are answerable before God, because God has given people a conscience. And unless they are very sick, their conscience will tell them that these things are wrong. Oh, this is a very complex question, but surely as Christians, we do not simply say, if people aren't Christians, let them do what they like. That's none of our business. God will judge. We can say, by virtue of your creation as a human being, there are certain standards written into your conscience. And unless you are very corrupt, your conscience will tell you that certain things, such as the ones I've mentioned, are wrong. So we don't say outside Christianity anything goes. We do say there are certain standards which any human society should observe, whether it has faith or not in God. So I would suggest this useful basis for study in the first two chapters of Romans.
This talk is continued on the next cassette.